I've realized something about people trying to make money online. Most of them aren't lazy, they're just scattered. They jump from idea to idea, chasing the next thing that looks like it might finally work. And I get it. Your algorithm is filled with unique money-making opportunities, crypto, dropshipping, YouTube, all of it. The problem isn't focus, the problem is noise. And if you can't learn to cut through it, you'll spend years busy but never actually building anything. In this video, I want to break down why it's so hard to stay focused long enough to get rich online, and how learning to focus on one thing completely changed everything for me. If you're new here, my name is Michael Elliott. Over the last few years, I've built multiple e-commerce brands, generating more than $5 million in sales on Amazon. But I didn't start there. Like everyone else, I was broke, hopping from one business model to the next, thinking success came from trying everything. It wasn't until I sat down, blocked out that noise, and spent years learning one thing: e-commerce, specifically selling on Amazon. That's when everything clicked. So by the end of this video, I want you to understand what actually stops you from focusing, how to break out of that cycle, and how to finally start building something real. Pattern is always the same. You find a new idea, get excited, do a few days of research, maybe buy a course, and then something else comes along that looks better. That constant reset destroys any real progress you could have made. And most people think they have a focus problem, but the truth is they've never slowed down long enough to understand why they keep restarting. Most people keep jumping around because they're chasing speed. They want results as fast as possible. And when they don't get them, they assume the thing is broken. But you should know by now that every single business model works for someone. Amazon works, crypto works, YouTube works. The difference isn't the model, it's the focus. If you spend your time chasing quick results, you never get past that learning phase, which is where most people quit. They're constantly starting over instead of compounding what they've already learned. Now, the problem with quick wins is that they teach you to chase dopamine, not progress. You start relying on small hits of excitement, a new logo, a new store, a new course, instead of getting addicted to the results that come from repetition. Think about it. Every skill you've ever gotten good at, whether it was the gym, a sport, whatever, came from doing the same boring reps over and over until it became second nature. Business is the same way. You don't get paid for doing something once, you get paid for doing something so many times that it becomes predictable. And when you're constantly jumping between things, you never give yourself that chance. For me, that lesson hit hard. I lost over $6,000 on my first product, then another $1,000 on my second one. And at the time I thought, maybe this Amazon thing just isn't for me. But looking back, that was the exact point where most people would have quit. The only reason I didn't was because I had already wasted so much time jumping between ideas that I told myself, I'm going to master this one thing, even if it takes years. And that decision changed everything. Once I stuck to Amazon long enough to learn the why behind my mistakes, the wins started to compound. My third product did over $100,000 that first year. Same platform, same concept, completely different results. Here's how I look at it. If what you're doing feels like progress but doesn't lead to measurable results, it's probably a distraction. Scrolling for new business ideas, watching 50 YouTube tutorials, building logos, redoing packaging, those things feel productive, but they don't actually move the needle. Learning is uncomfortable. It usually looks like doing something, failing, and then doing it again slightly better. So if you're constantly learning but never executing, you're not learning, you're hiding behind the idea of progress. When you're truly learning, it feels slower, but you're building something real underneath it. Now, the biggest difference is how you think about time. Dabblers treat time like it's endless, like they can always start over. People who are serious treat time like currency. They know that every restart comes with a cost: momentum, energy, and confidence. And once I understood that, I stopped dabbling. I made a rule for myself: if I start something, I give it at least a full year before deciding it's not working. And that mindset alone forced me to go deeper, to actually solve problems instead of escaping them. Because truthfully, that's what separates most people who make money online from those who don't. Not talent, not luck. It's the ability to stick with one thing long enough to let it pay you back. Once you actually know what you're working toward, discipline stops being hard. The reason you can't stay consistent isn't because your lack of motivation, it's because you don't believe the thing you're doing will work long term. And the lack of belief kills momentum before it even starts. When I finally committed to Amazon, like really committed, everything got simpler. Before that, my brain was scattered across 10 different business ideas. One day it was dropshipping, the next day crypto, the next day content creation. Once I told myself, I'm going to master one skill, and that's selling on Amazon, I could finally start thinking clearly. Committing to Amazon just cut out all the noise, right? I didn't have to wonder, what should I work on today? I already knew. So every hour went into finding better products, improving listings, building systems, and learning advertising. That kind of clarity turns into structure. I stopped wasting energy switching tasks or comparing myself to everyone else. When you're locked into one path, every small decision becomes easier because it all feeds into the same goal. And once I simplified, discipline wasn't something I had to force, it was just part of the process. I think a lot of people get addicted to being busy because it feels like they're doing something. They spend their whole day answering messages, watching tutorials, making to-do lists, and they confuse movement with progress. But in business, busy is often just avoidance. It's a way to feel productive without having to face the real work that actually matters, like launching, testing, or taking risks. When I started focusing on actual outcomes instead of activity, everything changed. If something didn't directly lead to more sales, better systems, or long-term skills, I would just stop doing it. Productivity isn't about how many hours you work, it's about how many useful hours you stack on top of each other. If you're new, clarity doesn't mean having every answer, it just means choosing a direction and accepting that you'll figure things out as you go. You don't need a 10-year plan, you just need to know what you're trying to build right now. So for me, clarity looked like this. I'm going to learn how to sell one product successfully on Amazon. That's it. Once I did that, the next step became obvious. Launch another, scale the systems, build a brand. Clarity is just about making one decision that removes 100 smaller ones. When you simplify your goals, your brain stops fighting you, and that's when focus starts to stick. And with all the advice online nowadays, filtering through can be pretty tough because the internet is loud. Everyone has an opinion, and half the people giving advice haven't actually done the thing they're talking about. The way I filter advice now is simple. If someone hasn't achieved what I want, I don't listen to them, period. I only take advice from people who've built real results, not theory. That alone saves you years. When I was new, I'd watch 10 different videos from 10 different creators and wonder why I was so confused. Because I was mixing 10 different strategies that didn't belong together. Pick one mentor, one framework, and tune out the rest until you've executed on it fully. That's how you build traction. When you actually know where you're heading, focus becomes the default. You stop needing motivation because everything you do just connects back to that end goal. If your goal is to build a brand that gives you time freedom, you make decisions differently. You don't waste time on side hustles that promise fast money but keep you stuck in the same loop. Every action starts to align with that one outcome, and that's what creates long-term discipline. It's like driving somewhere new. The first time you're checking the map, second guessing every turn, but once you've driven it enough times, you don't even really think about it. You just go. That's what clarity does. It gives you the mental GPS so you can move without hesitation. And when you have that, discipline stops being something you try to have, it just becomes who you are. When I finally committed to Amazon, I learned something I wish I knew earlier. Focus isn't a moment, it's a loop. You choose a direction, you learn, you test, you adjust, and you repeat that cycle over and over until it works. Most people never finish that loop. They quit right before the part where the results start showing up. In my business, the focus loop has always looked pretty similar, no matter how much I've grown. It starts with product research, looking at data, trends, and market demand. Then I'll test a concept, maybe launch a small batch, and gather feedback from real customers. If something doesn't perform the way I expected, I don't view it as failure, it's just feedback. I take what I learned, adjust the product or the marketing, and then launch again. That's the loop. And once you understand that's the process, you stop getting emotional about results. You stop attaching your identity to one product or one idea because you realize the goal isn't to be right, the goal is to refine until it works. Now, the reason most people struggle with focus is because they make emotional decisions. They base everything on how they feel instead of what the data is actually saying. In Amazon, the data tells the truth. It doesn't care about your feelings, it just shows you what's real. When I started using tools like Zonbase, it changed everything. Instead of guessing what people might buy, I could literally see what they were already spending money on. And so that allowed me to make logical decisions instead of emotional ones. So instead of asking what product do I like, I start asking what product has proof of demand and space for me to compete. Once you train yourself to use data as your compass, you stop second guessing every move. That's what keeps your focus clean and your growth consistent. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is expecting overnight success. And I get it. We live in a world where everyone's showing the highlight reel, but if you want to build something that actually lasts, you've got to give it time. For new sellers, I usually say it takes around 6 to 12 months to really start seeing traction, assuming you're consistent. Those first few months, it's mostly learning, understanding product research, refining your listings, figuring out what advertising strategies actually make sense. It's not the part where you make crazy profits. It's a part where you're building the foundation that allows you to do so later. And that's the phase where most people quit. Not because it's impossible, but because they expected it to move way faster. The irony is, if they just kept going for 3 to 6 months, that's usually where things start to click. Boredom and self-doubt are a part of the process. No one's immune to it. There were times in my first year where I'd look at my numbers, see no progress for weeks, and start thinking maybe this just wasn't meant for me. But every time I felt like quitting, I'd go back and look at what I had actually learned in that time. Even if I wasn't making money yet, I was building skills, negotiating with suppliers, optimizing listings, managing ad spend. Once you realize those skills stack, it's easier to keep going. And honestly, boredom is usually a sign you're doing the right thing. It means you're past the hype phase and actually building something. The people who succeed are the ones who can show up even when it's not exciting anymore. Consistency is what compounds everything. If you put in focused effort for long enough, the growth starts stacking, not linearly, but exponentially. Every product you launch teaches you something that makes the next one better. Every mistake turns into a system you won't repeat. And eventually, that consistency turns into momentum. That's why I always say, focus doesn't mean doing something once really well. It means doing the right things repeatedly until they can't not work. It's boring, it's repetitive, and it's exactly what separates people who talk about success from people who actually live it. When you start seeing focus as a loop, not a one-time choice, everything changes. You stop trying to arrive and instead you start refining. And that's where the real wealth is built. Not in the one big win, but in the hundreds of small ones that come from finishing that loop again and again. When I launched my first product, I lost $6,000. It hurt, not just because of the money, but because I had put in months of something that completely flopped. My second product didn't do much better. I lost another couple $1,000. But my third product did over $100,000 in that first year. The crazy part is nothing about the market changed. The only thing that changed was me, my focus. I stopped trying to outsmart the process and started refining it. That's when everything started compounding. The skills, the results, and eventually the income. Staying focused through failure taught me that losing isn't the opposite of winning, it's just part of it. When I lost that first $6,000, I was embarrassed. I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But after sitting with it, I realized the only real failure would have been quitting. That loss showed me exactly what not to do. I learned how to read supplier quotes better, how to validate demand more accurately, and how to price for profit instead of ego. Every mistake gave me a piece of the playbook I still use today. And once I understood that failure was data, not identity, it stopped scaring me. That mindset was everything. Once I stopped seeing setbacks as signs to quit, I could finally start learning faster. Most beginners spend months trying to avoid mistakes, but all that really does is just delay the real learning. When you accept that failure is a part of the process, you move through those lessons a lot quicker. And as I scaled, the same principle I applied to everything: hiring, marketing, product launches. It was never about perfection, it was about iteration. Every launch became an experiment, every result was feedback, and that feedback was how I kept improving. That's what took me from being a guy with one product to running a brand that generated millions. The biggest shift for me was building a rhythm around review and adjustment. Every week I'd look at my numbers, not obsessively, just intentionally. What worked, what didn't, what needed to be improved next week. And that one habit forced me to stay connected to reality instead of emotion. It's easy to feel like you're working hard and making progress, but if the data doesn't reflect it, you're just staying busy. That weekly review process became my feedback loop. It helped me identify what was moving the needle and what wasn't. That habit alone probably saved me from years of spinning my wheels. When I help new e-commerce or Amazon sellers, the biggest thing I try to get across is patience. The first few months are where most people get tested. It's a learning curve and it's uncomfortable. You're putting in work and it feels like nothing's happening. But that's exactly where growth is happening. It's just not visible yet. I tell them, don't measure progress by your profits in month one, measure it by your understanding. Are you getting better at product research? Are your listings improving? Are you starting to understand the numbers? Because those are wins, even if they're not financial yet. Once you focus on those small improvements, the results always catch up. Most people quit because they mistake silence for failure. They expect progress to be loud, big sales, big milestones, but in reality, the early stages are quiet. You're learning, you're testing, you're building foundation, and it feels like no one's watching. That's the part most people can't handle. The part where you're working hard, but not getting validation. But the irony is, that's the stretch where all the hard stuff compounds. If you can just hold on through that phase, that's when things finally start to move. Your first sale, your first profit, your first month of consistent numbers. And once that happens, momentum takes over. That's why I always tell people, don't quit during the silence. That silence is the sound of progress catching up to you. You don't need to meditate for 3 hours a day or delete every app on your phone. You just need a system that keeps you consistent. For me, focus stopped being about motivation a long time ago. It became about structure, accountability, and simplicity. Doing fewer things but doing them better. Because focus isn't something you find, it's something you build through repetition. The way I structure my week now is simple. Everything revolves around priorities, not tasks. At the start of every week, I ask myself one question. What's the one thing that, if I get it done, moves the business forward the most? That becomes my anchor for the week. From there, I time block my schedule around deep work sessions, usually 3 to 4 hours at a time, where I don't check messages, I don't scroll, I don't switch tasks. These windows are for building, creating, or analyzing, not reacting. Everything else, like emails or calls, gets bashed into smaller time slots later in that day. That structure lets me control my attention instead of letting everyone else control it for me. My daily system is built on momentum. I start small and stack wins. Mornings are where I set the tone. I do something active to clean my head, then I sit down and review my priorities for the day. No 30-step morning routine, just clarity, right? Once I know exactly what I'm working toward, it's pretty easy to lock in. And I've learned that protecting your focus starts with protecting your inputs. What you listen to, who you follow, what conversations you engage in. If you constantly surround yourself with noise, it's impossible to hear your own direction. So my routine isn't about doing more, it's about creating space to think and then executing with precision. Accountability changes everything. When you're doing this alone, it's easy to rationalize excuses, to tell yourself, I'll do it tomorrow or I'll start again next week. But when you have a mentor or a community around you, that dynamic will change. You start holding yourself to a higher standard because someone else is watching. When I started working with mentors early on, that's when things really started to move a lot faster, right? They helped me see blind spots I didn't even know I had. And falling off track is normal. It's not a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're human. The key is to reset quickly without burning everything down. When I lose focus, I don't start over from scratch, I just zoom out. I try and look at what caused it. Was I overwhelmed? Was I distracted? Was I chasing something new because I got bored? Once I identify that, I strip things back to basics. Usually that means focusing on one main task, rebuilding momentum through action and not overthinking it. You don't need a clean slate, you just need a clean direction. Every time you fall off, it's just another opportunity to refine the system that keeps you on. If I could leave people with one principle, it's this. Focus compounds. It's not about how fast you move, it's about how consistently you move in the same direction. You don't need 10 ideas or 20 streams of income. You need one thing you believe in enough to master. That's what builds real momentum. Every rep you put in, every skill you refine, every lesson you learn, it all stacks. And over time, that stack turns into something way bigger than you expected. That's how you build freedom, not by chasing what's new, but by refining what already works. Because in business, and really in life, success doesn't go to the most talented or the most motivated. It goes to the person who can stay focused long enough for their work to compound. That's really the secret. And it's not glamorous, but it's what lasts. If this message hit home for you and you're tired of starting over, go watch my video, How I Turned My Side Hustle into $1 million Brand in My 20s. It breaks down the exact steps I took to go from losing thousands on my first product to building multiple 7-figure brands. And more importantly, it'll show you how to finally stay locked in long enough to make it happen for yourself.